Okay, y'all, this is where I'm gonna really feel like I did last year. Like as I speak to you guys out there in TV land, um, as I recover from this surgery, I'm reminded of last year where I'm just like speaking to a screen the whole time. But I'm gonna try and get you guys to understand what comes next. Now that you've seen the video on the French Revolution, you got to understand how things get real radical. The French rewrite, not rewrite, but they create a constitution based on Enlightenment principles, right? The Declaration of the Rights of Man, and they get rid of the monarch and all this stuff. So, like, what next? The dust kind of settles on the situation, the radical phase of the revolution. Where do the people of France go from here? And that's what the subject of this lecture is going to be on. This video is going to be a little bit longer than the two that I showed you before you watched the documentary, okay? Because this one's going to actually take you forward what happens next, okay? And there's really two installments. There's today's installment, which is going to talk about the type of France that gets created by this guy named Napoleon. And then the next video will be about what Napoleon does after he comes into power. Okay, so once again, we're going to share the screen. Okay, I think I'm going to go here. It's been a while since I did this, so okay. Blow this up a little bit. All right, so I'm going to kind of take you through this way. So when you guys open up this module, if you will, right, November 12th, it's what I'm doing right now. Only my video that you're watching was embedded right here, okay? So the thing that is important for you guys to realize is that when the terror ends, so the radical phase of the revolution kind of finally ends with the death of Robespierre and all those guys, okay? Now what? Like, do we bring a king back? Like, what do we do? That's going to be the big question. People don't like a lack of stability. And the thing about revolutionaries is they're good at destabilizing the situation. They're good at tearing down. They're good at replacing what was there, right? That's why they're radicals, because that's what they do. But what about when it comes time to build things back up again? Because you got a bunch of French people kind of looking around going, well, that sucked, right? A lot of our friends are dead. A lot of the people we knew are now dead. France has been attacked by all these forces outside of its own borders, fighting this war against multiple other nations at the same time. So what do we do to kind of bring some sense of normalcy to the situation? Right. And that's where the age-old question gets asked, okay, grasshoppers, and that is the freedom versus safety. Like, what is more valuable to you, right? Would you rather feel free or be free, or would you rather be safe? Because you often cannot have both at the same time, okay? And that is the question these are the questions that are before the French people. Like, now that the guillotines have stopped, chopping people's heads off, do we want to feel free or be free, or do we want to feel safe? Okay. Let me give you guys an example. So when I was, when I was your age, like back in my day, when I was your age, right? I'm gonna sound like old man sweater pants here for a second. I was able to just get on an airplane, right? Like, I could just show up at the airport, like, whatever, half an hour before the flight, and just get on a plane. Okay. There was maybe some moderate, like, checkpoints for security, but that's about it. Okay. I was free to get on a plane 20 minutes before my flight. Well, for any of you that have traveled in your lifetime, that's not true anymore, is it? Because starting in the 1980s, people started to hijack airplanes, and they started to blow them up or fly them into buildings and stuff, correct? So now you've got all that security you need to go through before you get on an airplane. You no longer can just show up in an airport 20 minutes before your flight and get on. You no longer have the freedom to do that. Now you got to stand in line. You know, most of you get to the airport like 2 hours ahead of time because you got to go through all the security checkpoints and all that stuff before you can get on a plane, right? Because it's for your own safety. If you want to feel like you're relatively safe on the plane and nobody's going to hijack it or fly it into a building or something, you have to stand in those safety security lines. So you cannot at the same time have the freedom to just get on a plane and also be safe from somebody who might be bringing a weapon on that plane, right? You can't do that. You got to have one or the other. I think many of you are probably happy to give up the freedom of getting on a plane that fast to know that you're more safe with all the security now getting on the plane. Well, the people of France are in a similar dilemma, okay? What do we do now? We're free. The nobles are scattered or dead. The king and queen are gone. Now what? The problem is still a war going on. The situation with food isn't great. The financial stability of France is like terrible at this point because chaos is not good for economics, right? And so the people kind of look around and be like, what do we do now? And effectively what happens is the wealthy middle class of Paris comes together and they create something known as the Directory. And for a relatively short period of time, right, basically 4 years, the group of people called the Directory, who are kind of like elected, but not really, okay? I mean, they're not nobles. I mean, they don't like the one thing you guys see about the French Revolution, or you probably realize at this point, is nobility is kind of dead. Like nobody takes nobles seriously anymore after the French Revolution. Okay. At least not really in Western Europe. And so, yeah, these people in charge of France, the Directory, they're not nobles, but it's not like they're common people in the fields or streets either. They're pretty wealthy people. Okay. And you can see, you got to be under the Directory phase of the French Revolution. Only property owners could vote, right? So it's not that different from what happens in America. You know, after we kicked the British out of America and established our government there, yeah, you can vote now, but really only people that own property can vote. And that's kind of the scenario in France. Like it's a wealthy, elite, middle class. Again, these are not, you know, laborers in the fields or something. These are middle-class people with money who are running the show. And yeah, that shouldn't surprise any of us because we know that it's the middle class that runs revolutions, right? That makes revolutions happen and like make sure that they are carried out, right? And they do write a new constitution in 1795, okay? But the problem is that this constitution is weak. It's an overreaction, as you see, I say here, it's an overreaction to the monarch and Robespierre's Committee of Public Safety. So it's like, we don't want to give too much power to these Directory guys, right? Because that would be like a monarchy. But at the same time, it's got to be more structured. We don't want the people to have too much power because then they might start cutting people's heads off again, right? We might see the guillotines. So now you've got a France that is kind of frozen, if you will, frozen. Let it go, let it go. It's almost that time of year, right? So why did I just do that? But anyway, you got this overreaction, right? Where the people of France are kind of like paralyzed by, we don't want to return to the king, but we don't want the guillotines to go anymore. What do we do? What do we do? Freedom or safety? Freedom or safety? Bottom line is, many people in France are looking for a guy, right? They're looking for a guy to bring stability. And you're going to see that this happens in history, right? Where somebody will make great promises and they will come in and sell you on, you know, I'm the guy for the job. All right. And it just so happens that, you know, people are going to want safety and stability over freedom. Okay. It's very similar to what's going to happen in Germany when I teach you guys about this in the 1930s. Okay. In the 1930s, many of you know this story. You know, the German people are suffering because they lost World War I and they got all this like debt put upon them and they feel bad about themselves. And this guy's going to come in named Adolf Hitler, who's going to be like, you know, I'm going to make you guys feel great about yourselves. I'm going to make Germany great again. Right? If you just kind of believe in me and give me the power, I will make sure that Germany rises from the ashes and becomes something great again. Well, guess what? France, long before Adolf and the Nazis, France is going to be in a situation like that as well. You know, people are feeling uncertain. People are feeling scared. They don't want to go to a monarch. They don't want to go to the guillotine. So what do? And they look to a single guy. Okay. That single guy is going to be Napoleon Bonaparte, Napoleon. Now, you know, the thing about Napoleon is that, you know, he was already a very popular officer in the military. I know that they briefly mentioned him in the French Revolution video you guys saw earlier in the week, but Napoleon had won his men over because he would win victories against the British. You know, he would win victories against France's opponents. And so the French people are filled with this sense of nationalism. Okay. And it's important that you realize that because Napoleon is going to tap into this sense of nationalism, pride in your country, this deal that, like, you know, the French people are great and they can make themselves great, and and Napoleon will lead them there, right? It's usually a military leader that taps into this. Okay, so Napoleon Bonaparte, who's already beloved, he's got an army that is extremely loyal to him because they fought with him against France's enemies during the Revolution, right? They're now ready to kind of do his bidding. Like, Napoleon Bonaparte is going to claim that he can be the guy that can fix France's problems. And this directory isn't cutting it. You know, people are still hungry. The financial situation is still bad. Napoleon's going to fix all that. Okay. Or so he says. So he's going to stage what is known as a coup d'etat. Repeat after me. Coup d'etat. Right. Okay. A coup d'etat is a quick seizure of power. Sometimes you'll see the phrase shortened to coup. And when you see that, we're not talking about chickens. A coup d'etat is a quick seizure of power. All right. Napoleon marches his guys in to where the directory would normally meet, right? And basically says, I'm taking over now. He becomes a dictator, a military dictator of France. Now, for your notes, what's the difference, right, between a monarch and a dictator, right? Isn't it one guy in charge who calls all the shots? Correct. It is one guy in charge who basically calls all the shots. In fact, as you are listening to my lecture or watching it right now, you should be thinking to yourself, in which direction is the revolution starting to move at this point, right? We moved all the way to the left with the radical phase, and we're killing all the nobles and we're killing all the priests and stuff because they were the ones that ruled over us all those years. But look what's starting to happen. Power's starting to come back into the hands of one guy, okay? What is the difference between a dictator and a monarch? Simple. A dictator is a secular leader. Napoleon Bonaparte does not claim that he got his power from God, right? That's not what a dictator is. A dictator does not claim to have royal blood or that he has his power from God. No. A dictator will tell you, I'm in charge because see that army back there? They're going to back me up. And that is a secular leader. Like, people of France, you want stability? I'll give it to you. But it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you a little bit of your freedom, as you're going to find out here. Okay. So that's really the difference between a dictator and a monarch. And you have to really understand that because, you know, it shows you that things have changed, right? Like things are getting more secular. The whole humanism thing is still, moving us in a certain direction. And that direction is not towards God. It's more secular. Okay. But being the dictator of France is not enough for Napoleon. Okay. He wants to fill his ego a little bit more than that. Okay. And so Napoleon is going to have himself crowned emperor in 1804. Okay. So what does that mean, right? Like he's going to be crowned emperor. Like, what are you talking about? Well, I mean, here's a picture of him, right? Here's where I want you guys to take a look at this picture of him. And by the way, he crowns himself emperor by having the Pope come into France and place the crown on him in front of everybody to see. You're like, well, why bring the Pope back? I mean, wasn't part of the French Revolution, especially the radical phase, all about getting rid of the Catholic Church? Like, why is he asking the Pope to come back and do this? Here's the deal, guys, and you got to keep this in mind, right? France had gone through a period, if you remember from the movie, called de-Christianization, where they tried to get rid of anything like Christian looking in France, right? They renamed the streets. They smashed Catholic churches. They took the wealth of the church away. So if the French had done all this stuff to de-Christianize France, why is Napoleon bringing a Pope back? Well, don't you guys see? The Catholic Church is happy to come back to France. Think about it. They've been kicked out now for years, and they want their influence back, especially the money that comes with having an influence in a country like France. Meanwhile, Napoleon knows that most French people, they're still Catholic. Like even though they kind of pretended that they were secular because they didn't want to be beheaded during the radical phase of the revolution, they are really still Catholic. They've just been kind of closet Catholics, right? They've just been quiet about it. Napoleon knows that. So he's going to bring the Pope in to crown him in front of everybody. See, look, the Pope has made me the emperor. And people accept that. The people of France are used to this kind of thing. And Napoleon's going to do just enough to make the situation in France better so people accept this, right? Like if he would have crowned himself emperor and then like acted like a absolute monarch type of thing and the situation didn't get any better, you probably would have people rise up against him just like they did, before the French Revolution. But he's going to make some key changes. And I think you're going to see these changes are according to Enlightenment ideals that are going to make a difference and are going to make people want to support him, even though he's a one-man show. Okay. And I want you right now to take a break from the video for a couple minutes to do this right here. How does this image of Napoleon, okay, you're doing a little 3 or 4 sentence historical situation analysis. How does this image remind you of Louis the 16th? What about this image, all right, reminds you of Louis the 16th, okay? So if you need to pause it to do that, you can do so now. And I'm going to start up here again as if you did this, or at least thought about it. So what is Napoleon going to do to make himself not be a monarch? I mean, obviously, he wants people to see him that way, but not really, right? He's an enlightened monarch in a sense. Well, look at some of the reforms he puts into place, okay? Fair system of taxes, right? No longer are you going to be exempt from taxes because you're a noble. That's done, okay? Now we're going to have a fair system of taxes. Everybody gets taxed, all right? A national bank is established in France. This is an important change. This goes along with the taxes for this reason. France is economically in shambles after the radical phase of the revolution. So it needs to get back on its feet. And no other countries around the world are going to lend money to France unless people believe France is economically stable. Well, think about it. If France is now collecting taxes And if France has a national bank now to put the money from those taxes in it and to run the government, other nations in Europe are be like, oh, France is finally stable again. They're no longer in that weird phase where they're killing everybody and we can't trust them, right? The wars have now stopped. And it's kind of like, all right, like France is a good bet now, all right? And that's why Napoleon does this, to stabilize France economically. And he also institutes a system of secondary schools, okay? And these are going to be based on merit, right? So if you guys don't know what a secondary school is, you're sitting in one right now, okay? A secondary school is like high school. And the French kind of put this money and development into public education, if you will, so that the people in school can learn, the population of France can get like educated, but also you can rise up through the ranks under Napoleon, right? Think about that. That's not something you were able to do under feudalism. You were born into your status and you had to stay there, but not anymore. Okay. Now you can rise up through the system if you do well in school, right? You can even be chosen for positions in government as long as you recognize that this guy's in charge. Okay. But you could serve like under him in government in various ways. And the code for law is rewritten into what will be known as the Napoleonic Code. Okay. Again, look at the remnants of the Enlightenment here. Okay. Meaning the leftovers of the Enlightenment, they're still here. But the French Revolution was not a complete waste, right? We now have equality of all citizens under the law. It doesn't matter. Like there's no that nobles and then like the rest of us. Equality of citizens under the law. All right. That's a big change that people embrace. They're willing to put up with this guy for the stability of everybody's equality under the law. And, that's what we fought this revolution for anyway. However, remember what I told you at the start of this lecture. If you want freedoms like equality under the law, like schools that you can go to rise up in society, right? Taxing for everybody that's fair. Like these are kind of freedoms or senses of equality that we all have, right? If you want that, you're gonna have to trade something for it. And that is your individual freedom. It's very important you realize that, grasshoppers. A guy like Napoleon, for example, hear me on this, is not going to allow you to criticize him in the newspapers. He is not going to allow you to speak out against him, right, in government meetings and stuff, all right? Under Napoleon, there's no real freedom of the press and there's no real freedom of speech. You guys understand that? Like that's the price you pay. You have to give those freedoms up for the stability that Napoleon is bringing in these other areas. And at least at this point in history in France, people are willing to make that trade, okay? So I want you to really think about the extent to which Napoleon's government maintained those ideals of the French Revolution, right? Yes, people are trading in their freedoms for safety and stability by allowing him to be now the Emperor of France, okay? However, you can see in his legal code and some of the reforms he makes that not all is lost, all right? The problem you're going to see is Napoleon is just getting started. He's got everybody, or not everybody, but a lot of people in France are on board with him. He's creating a powerful France. He's building up the military. He's building up the economy, right? He is giving people a sense of pride and nationalism. And then right after he brings that stability, he's going to completely destabilize the entire situation by going to war with all of Europe at the same time. And that is going to be the subject for the next lecture video. See you then, grasshoppers.